Well, this video has been a long time coming, but it's finally here. Steven Spielberg is one of my personal heroes. His movies took me to incredible new worlds and on unforgettable adventures. As a child, he captured my imagination more than any other director, and as an adult, my love and appreciation for him grew even more. But how do his films compare to one another? In this video, I'm gonna rank every single one of his films from worst to best. We're gonna go over his entire filmography in one very long video in order to answer the big question. What is the best movie Steven Spielberg has ever made? Well, at least according to yours truly. Before we begin, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share this video. I really appreciate it. Now, make yourself comfortable, grab some popcorn, and let's do this. This is every single Steven Spielberg film ranked from worst to best. Oh, I can't believe I'm actually doing this. Number 34. So, what is the worst movie Steven Spielberg has ever made? It's this one. It sucks. For my money, The Lost World Jurassic Park is the one Spielberg film that I could do without. But why? Well, it's because out of all of his lesser films, this one was the most impressively bad. This is the one film out of all of the bad ones that had all of the groundwork laid out before it to become a good movie, and yet it still managed to screw it all up. What do I mean by that? Well, this movie was more expensive than the first Jurassic Park, but it looks cheaper. The dinosaurs aren't as magical, thrilling, or threatening as in the original. All the wonder seems to have been sucked out. The action scenes weren't as exciting, the special effects weren't as convincing, everything seems like it's being taken down a level, and I have no idea why. Jeff Goldblum feels like a shadow of his former self in this movie. In the first Jurassic Park, he was probably the most memorable and charismatic character of the bunch, but here he's basically just a glorified babysitter. The rest of the cast is dull and the characters were uninteresting. The whole movie they just talk about nothing. The movie was so boring, it was a genuine challenge to remain conscious. Julianne Moore was bland, the villains were bland, the story was convoluted and unsatisfying. Steven Spielberg has made a bunch of bad films over the years, but only one of them had a fantastic predecessor, found a way to ruin everything the first one made great, managed to be boring and stale throughout, and spawned a consistently terrible franchise of one bad film after another. And that film, ladies and gentlemen, the film that started this reign of failure was this one, The Lost World Jurassic Park, the very worst movie Steven Spielberg has ever made. But hey, from here, we can only go up. Number 33. Imagine we lived in an alternate universe where the movie Airplane wasn't funny. Now open your eyes and imagine no longer, because that movie exists. It's called 1941, and it's not very good. This movie is an anomaly in Spielberg's filmography. It was released in the heart of what I consider to be the peak of his filmmaking career, straight after Jaws and Close Encounters, and right before Raiders of the Lost Ark and E.T. One of these films is definitely not like the others. I really don't know what Spielberg was thinking with this one. The film has a very large ensemble cast with big names, but none of them are used to their fullest potential. It's as if every single scene a new character is introduced and he's played by a famous face, including Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, Christopher Lee, John Candy, Nancy Allen, Warren Oates, Slim Pickens? Hell, even Toshiro Mifune is here, most famous for his Kurosawa movies. But instead of being a fun and hilarious romp, 1941 ends up being overly long and unnecessarily bloated. The majority of the humor leans on slapstick that just doesn't work. There were a few chuckles here and there, but zero belly laughs. Honestly, at the end of the day, the film just ends up being boring. The story was boring, the characters were boring, and the jokes were boring. I really don't know what else to say about this film. 1941 really is a failure on every level, and one of Spielberg's absolute worst. Number 32. The Sugarland Express was Steven Spielberg's big screen debut feature. He did make a feature-length TV movie before this one, but we'll get there. As for this film, even though there are brief glimpses of Spielberg's budding talents, it simply doesn't stand the test of time like most of his other work. The main issue with the movie is that its story doesn't really give you any characters that you can sympathize with. It's about a Bonnie and Clyde type situation, where a couple kidnaps a police officer as they go on a cross-country road trip in order to take back their child before he is placed in foster care. The only problem is that, at least for me, I want that child in foster care, because his parents are criminals who are unfit to raise him. So the whole film we follow this couple that we're meant to root for, but I find myself rooting for them to fail instead and be captured by the authorities. At the end of the day, that leads to an experience that isn't particularly engaging. The actors do a serviceable job, I guess, but none of the performances actually stood out. The film was shot in a pretty standard way, with only a few moments showcasing the visual style and creativity that Spielberg would later be known for. The story wasn't too interesting, I didn't care about what was going on, the pacing was slow and meandering. Basically, the film just wasn't for me. It was a decent first step, and greater things were yet to come, but there's a reason why the Sugarland Express isn't widely regarded today. Number 31. One of my favorite things about Spielberg's films is that the majority of them are geared to both children and adults alike. Genuine, wholesome family pictures for everyone to enjoy. The BFG, on the other hand, is just a straight-up kids movie. I mean, sure, the visuals are great, and Mark Rylance and Ruby Barnhill deliver excellent and earnest performances, but the story was just, well, dumb. I mean, there's a scene where they go to the Queen of England so she could help them fend off the mean giants. I just can't take this stuff seriously at all. Also, the humor was some of the most childish Spielberg has ever done. Coming back to the Queen, there's literally a scene where everybody in the room experiences extreme flatulence. I can appreciate a good fart joke every once in a while, but this was just stupid. Another issue is that the film lacked any meaningful stakes. A girl who gets whisked away by a giant to a magical faraway land should be at least concerning, but the girl doesn't seem to be even a little bit anxious. Also, the mean giants weren't scary or intimidating, they were just silly and goofy. I understand that was the intention, but they could have made more threatening and interesting villains instead, which could have helped me get invested more, but that opportunity was wasted. Of course, Spielberg doesn't need to cater his films to my personal tastes, that doesn't make any sense, but everyone has their own experiences, and my experience with this film was pretty negative. I don't know anything about the original book, but the film was shallow, humorless, and lackluster. It's pretty harmless for children, but for adults, I'd recommend you give the BFG a pass. Number 30. There once was a time when I thought that Always would always be my least favorite Spielberg film, but I have to admit that it grew on me. Not by a lot, of course, it's still a bad film and one of Spielberg's worst. Also, one of his most awkward. It's about a man who dies whilst trying to put out a forest fire, and the whole movie he roams the earth as a ghost as he tries to help another man get his girl? I mean, I guess I'd want my wife to move on too if she was in that position, but I don't think I'd be as invested in that happening as Richard Dreyfuss was. Maybe it's just me, I don't know. The one good thing I can say about this movie is that it has some emotional weight to it. The grief of losing a loved one, the difficulty of moving on, the excitement of newfound love. But everything else? Yeah, it didn't really work for me. The movie starts really slow. All the focus is on the romance between Richard Dreyfuss and Holly Hunter, but it's just not that interesting. I guess they're cute together, but it takes 30 whole minutes for the plot to actually take off. Always is just a nothing movie for me. The only aspect that is truly worthy of note is that Audrey Hepburn is in the movie, delivering her final performance. But she's barely in it and she doesn't do much. Richard Dreyfuss plays Richard Dreyfuss, only with the added dose of being an asshole. He was constantly chewing the scenery and it distracted me from everything else that was going on. Needless to say, it was hard for me to care about the characters in this one. There's not much else to say about this movie, honestly. Visually it isn't interesting, the side characters aren't memorable in the slightest. Basically, it's a movie about putting out forest fires. Tells you everything you need to know about it right there. Number 29. By all accounts, Munich should be a winner for me. It was nominated for 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. It's a spy thriller that takes itself really seriously, and it deals with a subject matter that, as an Israeli man, resonates with me more than it would with others. Also, as an added bonus, it stars a bunch of very famous Israeli actors, and it's cool that I know who they are while the rest of the world sees them as complete no-names. That guy right there, is one of the most popular comedians in Israel. I'm not kidding. To make a long story short, Munich has 2 thumbs up written all over it. And yet, it's one of my least favorite Spielberg films. There are a few reasons why. First of all, it is one of the least visually appealing films Spielberg directed, in my opinion. The muted colors, the dirty settings, the uninspired camera work, the film is downright ugly. But the real reason why this film isn't for me is that it doesn't really have any characters that I personally can relate to. Aside from the fact that the characters were pretty dull and uninteresting, a large chunk of them, including the main character, aren't much better than the villains they're trying to take down. Sure, I'm on the side of the Israelis, of course, but these characters do some questionable things, to say the least. The result is that none of the characters earn my support, and I'm left watching horrible people get murdered by other horrible people. And personally, that's just not my idea of a good time. The dark and violent subject matter made watching the film a pretty unpleasant experience for me. At least a film like Schindler's List has a clear good versus evil dynamic, where the good guys, flawed as they may be, have a sense of virtue to them that makes you root for them and relate to them. In this movie, however, I didn't feel the virtue. Munich is a very dark film that sorely needed some light in it. Munich is an L for me. Oh, and that sex scene at the end was probably the most unintentionally hilarious scene in Spielberg's filmography. Number 28. Ready Player One has a lot of pop culture references in it, and while sure, it's fun and nice to see the Iron Giant or the motorcycle from Akira making appearances, those alone aren't enough to elevate this film higher on the list. It also doesn't help that visually the film just can't handle the competition. The CGI here is really bad. I know the intention was to make the characters and the locations look and feel like a video game, which is what it is. And sure, I guess they did a good job with that, but it's still just an eyesore. It's not fun to look at, which is a huge handicap. That's not to say that Ready Player One is terrible, but it's not very good either. Something about this film just doesn't work, and if you ask me, it all boils down to the script. The dialogue feels unnatural, like a bunch of old people try to emulate in their writing the way our modern internet generation speaks, and it just comes out as cringy. Other problems with the script include a huge amount of exposition dumps, where the characters are obviously relaying information to us, the viewers, instead of actually having a normal conversation, and also a bunch of really jarring plot conveniences, like the way Percival found the clue that led him to the first key. You mean to tell me it's been 5 years and nobody's figured that out? I just don't buy it. There were a few specific scenes that I liked. The Shining scene was the best thing in the movie, the way they recreated the iconic moments like the blood elevator, the twins, and that freaky girl in the shower. It was a really great tribute to one of the greatest horror films of all time. Other than that, some of the action sequences were pretty entertaining, and I did like the video gamey aspect of the plot. The whole find 3 keys and open the door plot device made the film feel like an action-adventure game. And as a person who likes action-adventure video games, that was pretty fun. I also liked a few of the characters. I liked IROC, he was funny. Ben Mendelsohn was a decent villain, but all of this isn't enough to save this movie. The downsides far outweigh the good here. I understand if some people like this film better than I do, but for me, Ready Player One is a disappointment. Number 27. War Horse is a movie where the main character is a horse. Yeah. This is the point of the list where the films stop being outright horrible, but they're still pretty bad overall. What can I even say about a movie like this? The problem lies with the premise. I'm sorry, but I just don't care about animals as much as I do humans, which is inconvenient because the film keeps trying really hard to humanize Joey the horse, with constant close-ups and musical flourishes, that it just feels kind of awkward. It's just me, of course, but when I see a close-up of a horse, I don't see emotion or conflict or drama. I just see a horse. The only parts that work emotionally are with Albert and the horse, especially in the beginning of the film. If you ask me, Albert should have been the main character. If the film would have been about Albert looking for his horse from his own point of view, I think the film would have been much stronger. We could have seen him travel through war-torn Europe, evading danger as he meets other characters who encountered the horse along the way, at which point we could be presented with glimpses of what the horse went through, but always keeping the focus on Albert and his emotional journey. That would have been way better in my opinion. But what we get instead is kind of the opposite. Albert is seen only on brief occasions, while the vast majority of the film is focused on the horse moving from place to place, meeting random characters along the way who stick around for small portions of the story at a time. Some of the characters were interesting and they were fun to spend time with. Others, though, not so much, which unfortunately results in an uneven viewing experience. Again, the movie isn't terrible, none of the films left on the list are. Warhorse does have a few powerful scenes that hit the mark. The cinematography and direction is well done, and the musical score was great. But the movie just didn't have the horsepower to garner a higher spot on the list. Number 26. Remember when everyone hated Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? I do. I was there. But let me tell you something. I only thought that I knew what a bad indie movie looked like. But then The Dial of Destiny came out, and it made me realize that Crystal Skull really isn't that bad. Sure, it's not great, but out of the now 2 legacy indie films featuring an older Indiana Jones, this one is definitely the better of the 2. I mean, it genuinely has a bunch of good scenes in it, especially during the first act, which is legitimately strong and is able to hold its own against its predecessors. Everything from the opening credits all the way to the moment Indy finds the Crystal Skull in Peru is straight up Indy goodness. His reveal at the beginning is great. The way he picks up his hat and the camera pans up to see his silhouette, and finally the man himself. It's his best reveal since Raiders in my opinion. The action scene in the warehouse was fun and fast-paced. Sure, Indy is older, but in this film he can still hang with the youngsters. His action scenes feel believable, and they take advantage of his age to add a welcome dose of humor. Then we have the infamous scene with the fridge, which was definitely over the top, but damn it, where's everyone's sense of fun? Escaping a nuclear blast by hiding in a fridge? That's badass. The diner scene is also great, with all the little details, great direction, and an effective character introduction for Mutt. The chase that comes immediately after was great as well. The film does have its bright spots. But of course, it has plenty of problems as well. The biggest being that, aside from Indy himself, the characters are pretty weak. Shia LaBeouf is fine. He's not great. Cate Blanchett is a one-dimensional, uninteresting, and non-threatening villain. She was very weak. Mike was lame, Marion was lame, Ox was bland. It's a godsend that Harrison Ford did a great job, because without him, the film would have been a disaster. Also, aliens just don't feel natural to Indiana Jones. This was always a fantasy-oriented franchise, so turning it to hard sci-fi felt odd and out of place. Visually, the film was uneven. At times it looked great, especially when practical effects were used, but the CGI was, well, I don't think I need to elaborate. So yeah, it's not a great movie. It's the worst indie film Spielberg has made, and it's relatively weak compared to Spielberg's filmography as a whole. But simply judging the film on its own, it's still bad, but not that bad. I can definitely have fun with this movie, and it wouldn't take too much effort either. Crystal Skull, you're alright in my book. Number 25. We're entering the not my cup of tea portion of the list, where the films are good, but I personally didn't get into them for one reason or another. And the film that kicks us off is West Side Story, one of the most unnecessary remakes of all time. The film is well made on a technical level. Most of the performances were good, especially from the side characters, and the story itself is a classic, of course. But it doesn't come even remotely close to the levels of the original film. And even though it might not be the correct way to judge this movie, I'd be lying if I said it didn't have an effect. The first time I saw this film, I actually enjoyed it quite a bit, but after watching it again, I realized that my enjoyment was circumstantial for the most part. First of all, I saw it when it came out in theaters, and at that time, I had not yet seen the original film, so I had nothing to compare it to. Secondly, it was one of the first films I saw in theaters after the pandemic, so it's possible I was high on theater popcorn or something. And finally, this film was my introduction to Rachel Zegler, so I didn't know anything about her at the time. Now, on the other hand, after seeing what an annoying brat she actually is, it soured my feelings towards her, and it affected my viewing experience. So as you can see, my mind has changed for the worse, and the issues of the film have become more prominent. Even though the film isn't bad, it does make a bunch of baffling decisions that served no purpose other than taking me out of the story, like switching the tomboy from the original film with a non-binary person? For what? Honestly, why make that change? What purpose does it actually serve to the story or themes? Answer: it doesn't serve any purpose. It's just a distracting modern change that didn't need to be there. Another strange decision was to have a bunch of scenes where the characters mostly speak in Spanish and to purposefully not have English subtitles for them. Now, it wasn't that much of an issue. It didn't prevent me from broadly understanding what was going on, but it's just such a weird decision that, again, serves no purpose whatsoever. Why does the film intentionally make sure that the vast majority of the people watching it won't understand a significant part of the dialogue in it? It boggles the mind. It doesn't enhance the experience or enriches anything in the film, it simply takes me out of it, needlessly. These decisions really hurt the film. Other than all that, the problems with the film amount to the fact that it's just not as good as the original. Most of the arrangements, the songs, and the choreography were a downgrade from the 1961 classic, although they were still pretty good overall. Also, the chemistry between Maria and Tony isn't as strong here. Their sudden love for one another feels forced and unnatural. The two lead performances were also some of the weaker ones here in my opinion. They weren't as good as the side characters. To sum up, West Side Story is not a bad adaptation per se, just an unnecessary one. It does its job well enough, the film looks good, the musical numbers are extravagant with sweeping cinematography, vibrant colors, and high-energy music, but it has too many issues for my liking. Personally, I'll stick with the original. Don't need the remake. Number 24. The Adventures of Tintin is Spielberg's flashiest film to date. It tries its absolute hardest to engage you on a visual level and drown you with eye candy, and it succeeds at parts, but as far as the characters or the emotional stakes go, the film is rather shallow. Tintin himself is very enthusiastic and motivated to solve the mystery of the unicorn, which works in his favor and helps the audience root for him. But he was also kind of annoying. Watching him aha and ooh and that's it his way through this film honestly got on my nerves a bit. His dog, however, was pretty cool, one of the best movie dogs I've ever seen. Captain Haddock, played by Andy Serkis, was easily my favorite character, completely down to Serkis's energetic and inebriated performance. He was the highlight of the film for me. Unfortunately, he is counterbalanced by a rather weak villain, played by Daniel Craig. He was pretty boring, nothing too interesting to say about him. Simon Pegg and Nick Frost also play a couple of police officers, and they were criminally underused here. This duo has already proven that they have the capability to create absolute gold on screen together, so the fact that they were very forgettable here was disappointing. But with the generally lackluster pool of characters, at least we get a fairly entertaining and intriguing mystery tale. Watching Tintin and Haddock slowly but surely put the pieces of the puzzle together as the plot progresses was pretty fun, and it helped push the film forward. So all in all, I'd say the characters and story are a mixed bag. So what about the visuals? They were also a mixed bag, I'm afraid. I'm not a fan of motion capture animation. I never liked this style. Granted, this is one of the better looking ones, but you can only go so far. The uncanny character models, coupled with the wacky set pieces and the bombastic camera work, leads to an incredibly in-your-face experience that certainly had its moments, but as a whole, wasn't all that enjoyable for me. There were only two places where the visual style worked. During the scene transitions, like the ship rising over the sand and various other examples, only with animation you can pull this off, and the action scenes, which took advantage of the animation to great effect. The gunpowder on the floor scene was tense and exciting, and that incredible bagar long take? Wow, legitimately one of the top 10 best action sequences in Spielberg's entire filmography. Super impressive stuff. The problem is that the non-action scenes are filmed as if they were action scenes. An example of that in-your-face style I mentioned before. Those scenes were just too much for my taste. Seeing as The Adventures of Tintin is Spielberg's only animated film, I gotta say that I expected more. What I got was a nice little adventure story with cool action, but the problematic presentation and the annoying characters hinder its place on the list. Number 23. After the success of Schindler's List, Spielberg decided to once again tackle a story about the suffering and cruelty experienced by an oppressed minority group. This time, instead of the Jews in Europe, we got a story about black slaves in America, and the results were not as great as the last time. Amistad is a strange case where it does a lot of things well, it has all the pieces, but it doesn't quite manage to combine them all into a cohesive whole. This leads to an uneven experience that is smaller than the sum of its parts. The good here is really good. There are a lot of great scenes and moments sprinkled in this film. Cinque is a great character. You don't understand him for vast swaths of the runtime, but you feel the fire in his soul. You see in his eyes that he's trying to listen and make sense of what's going on around him. You see he has more wisdom and life experience than it first appears. The elongated flashback where we see his capture and journey to the States was horrifying, disturbing, heartbreaking, and super effective. Just like in Schindler's List before it, Spielberg once again doesn't shy away from showing the cruelty and terror up close and personal, without cutting away. You really care for Cinque here. He was the heart of the film, and the performance by the actor, whose name I dare not try to pronounce, stole the show. The film is well shot, well edited, and the music was also good. So the film has a lot of good in it, but like I said before, the film isn't successful in making the most of what it has. The biggest problem I have with the movie is that other than Cinque, none of the other characters are very interesting. Alongside that, the film is painfully slow. The plot moves at a snail's pace. The courtroom plot of the film is well done, but it's also kind of bland, and it also meddles with a bunch of things that just aren't interesting at all. They were unnecessary. That makes the film a chore to sit through. The film is also way too long, like way too long. It's 2.5 hours, but the last 40 minutes are completely redundant. The film achieves everything it wanted to achieve by the hour and 50-minute mark, but it overstays its welcome way too much, rehashing themes and emotional beats only for the sake of being historically accurate. Amistad is a good film, and its heart is most definitely in the right place, but it was a disjointed viewing experience. At the end of the day, I've seen better courtroom dramas, I've seen better slavery movies, and of course, I've seen better Spielberg films. Number 22. Another film Spielberg made about the black experience in America is The Color Purple, and I'm placing this one just above Amistad because it has a slight emotional edge to it, in my opinion. The story here packs much more of a punch, especially early on, dealing with some pretty uncomfortable subject matters such as child marriage and sexual assault on minors, to name a few. It's a well-made film with solid cinematography and great performances all round. The music in the film was also a major highlight, some of the only fun I personally had with it. Which brings me to the issue I had with the film, which was that other than the music, there was little value or enjoyment to be had. It's a very uncomfortable experience. The things that our main character goes through are disturbing and horrific, but I didn't feel like I gained anything as a viewer by experiencing these things alongside her. I didn't particularly care about any of the characters, especially the despicable male characters here, who were absolutely disgusting and vile with little if any redeeming qualities. Danny Glover especially was a pain to watch, one of the most despicable characters I've ever met, but not in a fun love-to-hate kind of way, just purely in an unpleasant kind of way, which doesn't lend to my enjoyment. That lack of care unfortunately extended to the characters I was supposed to root for, and it's not like I didn't root for them, I did. I wanted to see Whoopi Goldberg's character and Oprah Winfrey's character do well and get through their obstacles, but not to the extent where I ever felt fully invested. Maybe it was because the tone of the film was uneven and it took me out of it. This is one film where I feel like Spielberg was more of a hindrance than a help. He tries to inject a light-hearted, even whimsical tone in certain scenes, but they just don't mesh well with the serious and disturbing scenes that come before and after. It was distracting and strange, and I felt like it was out of place every time it happened. It really hurt the film, in my opinion. Still, I'd be blind if I didn't see the qualities the film has, and it has a bunch of them, even if it is a film that I merely respect rather than love or enjoy. All in all, The Color Purple was a good film with good performances, a solid story structure, and a bunch of emotional scenes that hit the mark. But a few issues, characters I didn't care for, and a general lack of anything to actually grip me makes this film non-essential in my book. Number 21. I know The Terminal usually gets a lot of hate from Spielberg fans, and I can kinda see why. I just didn't mind this film personally. I didn't think it was that bad. I mean, sure, it's not a great film by any stretch, but it was a nice little comedic drama that does a bunch of things right. Tom Hanks' performance was great, and his story and motivations were very heartwarming. It's hard not to like this guy, and for me, a likable protagonist goes a long way, even if he isn't super unique or memorable. His main foil in the film is Stanley Tucci, the field commissioner at the airport. I love this bastard. He did an excellent job as the asshole villain you love to hate. The best scenes in the movie are the ones where they share the screen and play off of one another. It was fun seeing Stanley Tucci try to get rid of Hanks in various different ways, only for him to always find a way around it. So the hero was great, the villain was great, and their interplay was great. So why isn't this film higher on the list? Well, it's because of everything else. The side characters and their arcs were a mixed bag, usually veering towards the negative. Gupta was probably the best of them. He was funny, and the conclusion of his story was fitting and served a purpose, but it only goes downhill from here. Zoe Saldana plays an immigration officer who's secretly admired by a food service truck driver played by Diego Luna. Their story feels super unpolished. I mean, he proposes to her without ever actually talking to her face to face, and she says yes! That's schmaltz to the highest degree right there. Their story wasn't that great, but even that isn't the worst of it. The worst character in the film, by far, is Catherine Zeta-Jones's character. Everything related to her character was bad. Her acting was bad, her dialogue was bad, her interactions with Tom Hanks were the worst part about Hanks' character. The list goes on. I think a major reason for this is the simple fact that Steven Spielberg just doesn't know how to handle sex in his movies. If that scene from Munich wasn't already an obvious giveaway. Spielberg and sex just don't mix. Every time he tries to create a sexy character or a sexy scene, or anything sex-related for that matter, it comes off as cringy, awkward, and straight up weird. He should really stay away from that subject and stick to what he does best. In any case, The Terminal is far from Spielberg's worst film. An endearing main character and a fun villain push the film higher on the list, even with its many shortcomings. We're getting to the point of the list where the films are starting to be decent. Let's move on. Number 20. Look, I know AI has its fans, and it is one of the more unique Spielberg films, but I never truly got into it. I do see the appeal, but the movie never spoke to me in a way that made me care for it. As much as the film is unique, its backstory is unique just as much. This was originally supposed to be directed by Stanley Kubrick, but he passed away before he ever got the chance. So in his absence, Spielberg took the helm, and created a film that's one of a kind in regards to Spielberg's filmography. The tone and look of the film, the subject matter, the abundantly rich themes the film explores, I can't help but wonder how it would have ended up if Kubrick lived long enough to direct it himself. It's one of the greatest what-ifs in film history. Anyway, the film we got is the film we got, and if you ask me, AI Artificial Intelligence feels like a film that tries to say a lot of things, but has difficulty conveying them to the audience. The film feels very mechanical, which might be intentional considering it deals with robots and AI, but I personally didn't really like it. The film is very awkward and uncomfortable, especially near the beginning. The opening 15 minutes, all the scenes with the family at their house, were an exercise in cringe. It was legitimately hard to watch, and as far as the harsh tone, dark atmosphere, and general unpleasantness is concerned, it doesn't get much better as the film goes along. I mean, sex robots, the end of humanity as we know it, and a divisive, weird ending? No thank you. With that being said, the scene where the mother leaves David alone in the woods was actually great, legitimately heart-wrenching and terrifically acted. And from that point on, the film definitely improves. It opens up more, we get to see the world, meet new characters, the plot starts to move along, but it still never rises up to an above-average level. And it doesn't make up for the first 15 minutes which were unbearably slow and unpleasant. I kind of feel sorry for the film, just like I feel sorry for David, because just like David, it has a lot of great qualities, but it's still, to me, just shy of the real deal. I guess you can say this film just wasn't for me. Still, I applaud this film for its ambition. It has a lot of emotional heft, it deals with very complex subject matters, it makes you think, it makes you feel, it looks great, but it's just not enjoyable to watch. It's slow, it's strange, it's not very fun, and ultimately, it doesn't fill me with a sense of awe, wonder, and excitement like some of Spielberg's other films, especially his other science fiction films. It's a Spielberg film that doesn't feel like a Spielberg film, and even though to some people that may be a positive, to me, a person who adores the Spielberg feel, it made me like the movie less. Because of those reasons, the film has to settle for the number 20 slot, but we're definitely moving up in terms of quality here. It's just gonna get better and better from here on out. Number 19. The Post is actually a pretty good film. It's an effective journalistic political thriller about a scandal involving the Nixon administration, a la All the President's Men. Maybe not as good as that one, but it holds its own nonetheless. I find films like this to be very engrossing. The thrills of the newspaper business, chasing down leads and finding the story, it translates well to the big screen. It's very captivating. The Post was very well made, although I have some issues with it. I'll start with the good. Spielberg directs the hell out of this movie, and he does a great job mixing the serious subject matter with occasional light-hearted flourishes. My favorite scene is probably the one where they go over the pages of the report. I love how Spielberg lets the scene breathe and adds personality through the family dynamic. The wife counting how many people are there so she knows how many sandwiches to make, and of course, the daughter who makes a fortune selling them lemonade. The shot of the girl bringing the sign into the house is the icing on the cake. Speaking of, the cinematography is full of energy. Whether it's the camera or the characters on screen, the film is constantly in motion and it pushes the story along. The main source of dramatic conflict is whether to publish the story or not. Publishing will risk criminal indictment, but not publishing will mean surrendering the freedom of the press. I honestly don't know what I would have done if I was in the same position. All the actors do a great job. This is yet another Tom Hanks-Steven Spielberg collaboration, and Hanks brings the goods once again. Meryl Streep, on the other hand, wasn't as impressive as she could have been. This brings me to my biggest gripe with the movie, which is how it handles Meryl Streep's character. The whole angle of how she isn't taken seriously because she's a woman just doesn't hold any weight in today's day and age. Sure, in the 70s it was an issue, but The Post came out in 2017, when women were already far more respected and treated equally in the workplace, regardless of what some feminists might think. That's why this whole aspect of the film fell flat for me. Also, the message the film tries to push about how important it is to speak truth to power, hold our political leaders accountable, and how the press is supposed to serve the governed, not the governors, doesn't really work for me either, due to the state of the mainstream media today, which actually does the exact opposite. Well, that's enough of my ranting. Regardless of my personal political beliefs, The Post is still very good. However, in relation with the rest of Spielberg's filmography, it's nothing special, hence the ranking. But you should definitely check this one out. Number 18. Finishing off the not my cup of tea portion of the list is Empire of the Sun. This is a film that, honestly, I think is fairly good. It checks all the boxes. It's very well made on a technical level. The cinematography was great. It has a bunch of very impressive looking shots in it. The sound design is immaculate, it's very atmospheric, it's very mature and deals with heavy themes and subject matters. All of that is great. But I still didn't get into it. I think the thing that was most missing for me was a strongly written character to get behind. Christian Bale was fine. He did a serviceable job, an impressive job even for a child actor, but he was also annoying and not very interesting throughout the film. I know he has the big coming-of-age arc, he loses his innocence as he becomes exposed to the horrors of the world, and that was all good, but for whatever reason it didn't resonate with me as much as I wanted it to. Maybe it's because of the aforementioned annoyance factor. I mean, geez, even the characters in the movie think he's annoying. And they're right. Also, a big part of his character is that he's an aviation nut, which is not the most interesting obsession to say the least. Definitely not the most wondrous thing out there to get your whimsy on for. I mean, let's face it, on one side you got real-life dinosaurs, and on the other you got planes. Always. Needless to say, it didn't really speak to me. Speaking of whimsy, I felt the tone of the film was inconsistent. The film has a bunch of moments that try to put a positive spin on dire circumstances, and I don't think they worked very well. This is a film where telling the story from the point of view of a child, whilst definitely granting a different experience than we're used to, might not have been the best move. at least in my opinion. Other than Jim, the other characters were also just decent at best. John Malkovich, Joe Pantoliano, and Ben Stiller deliver adequate performances, but nothing too special. Aside from the characters, another issue I had with the film is its pacing. It takes a while for the film to get going and for the shit to hit the fan in an admittedly great scene, but even after that, the film moves at a very deliberate pace. Now, I don't have issues with slow films, never had, but sometimes you watch a film and you feel like the story and characters are just stuck in the same place for way too long. And in Empire of the Sun, I felt it double, both in terms of character and plot development, and also in physical terms, since for the majority of the film, the characters are stuck in an internment camp. All of this to say that the film just didn't do it for me. It was good, but not great. In short, Empire of the Sun is a sufficiently intriguing, competent film with several qualities, but it just doesn't do it for me as much as other Spielberg films do. It's harsh to rank good films like this so low, but that's the nature of Spielberg for you. He's made so many great films that you can still find quality works like this one relatively low on the list. Number 17. Well, we did it. We've arrived at the part of the list where I wholeheartedly love and enjoy the films. So I think it's fitting that we kick off the upper half of the list with the one that started it all, Duel. What a cool name. This is Spielberg's first feature-length film, so even though it was a TV movie, I'm counting it. The plot couldn't be more straightforward. Dennis Weaver plays a man who gets attacked on the road by a giant truck, and the whole movie plays out like a cat-and-mouse chase between them. Spielberg's gifts were apparent right from the very beginning. This is a very well-made directorial debut that keeps everything simple. The chase scenes were well shot and effectively edited, and the fact that you never see the truck driver just increases the tension and the suspense. It's kind of like a proto-Jaws in a way. Spielberg understood early on that sometimes it's better not to show something than show it. Beyond that, the film did a great job at making me resonate with the main character. Beyond the surface-level plot of a man trying to escape a killer truck, it also tells a story about a man trying to rediscover his masculinity. Throughout the film, he's always in the shadow of more imposing figures. The truck is the obvious example, of course. I mean, it's basically a giant phallic symbol, no wonder he feels inferior. But that's not the only piece of symbolism in the film. One of the best scenes in the film is a scene where he enters a bar and all the men stare at him, and it's obvious he feels intimidated. Not just because he doesn't know which one of them is the truck driver harassing him all the time, but also just because, well, he's a wuss. We see him talk to his wife on the phone, and it's obvious that he isn't the one wearing the pants in the household. Anyway, that element was something that I personally was able to relate to, so you can imagine how satisfying it was to see him finally take a stand against the truck near the end. A great culmination of all the build-up, and it was executed really well. So overall, Duel was a very solid debut feature for Spielberg. It's his shortest movie yet, and also one of, if not his most simple, so it lacks some of the weight and more profound nature of his later, better work. That's also kind of why I don't have much more to say about it. That basically brings the film down a few pegs by default. It just doesn't compare to the films above it, especially the ones at the very top, the masterpiece section, which we'll get to. But with that being said, as far as debuts go, Duel has nothing to be ashamed of. Number 16. I adore the original Indiana Jones trilogy, but even I have to admit that Temple of Doom is by far the weakest of the original three. I still love it a lot and I enjoy watching it when it's on, but it has too many flaws for me to ignore, and they're enough for me to separate it from Raiders and Crusade because in these films the flaws just aren't as present or as felt. The biggest problem with the film is the confusing and inconsistent tone. The film can go from goofy and dumb to very dark and disturbing. Moments that are supposed to be light feel dark and vice versa. It's a mess. Some other flaws are that the dialogue is much cornier and cheesier than usual. The artifacts that Indy is trying to obtain, the Shankara stones, aren't as interesting as the Ark of the Covenant or the Holy Grail. And there's a whole section of the film where Indy becomes evil Indy, and it was strange and weird and I didn't like it. This brings me to another major flaw, the characters. Willie was useless, annoying, and she kept whining and complaining throughout the whole damn film. She's a massive downgrade from Marion in every single way, except for looks. She's a very attractive woman. Spielberg is a very lucky man. Short Round was also annoying, but at least he does stuff, and his chemistry with Indy was better. It's still crazy to me that this guy won the Oscar like 40 years later. That's insane. And of course, Indy himself wasn't at his best in this movie. Putting aside the whole evil indie thing, he wasn't as charismatic, as competent, or as cool in this film as he was in Raiders. So all of these flaws weigh the film down for me, but as I said before, I still really like it. I consider it a heavily flawed but still awesome movie that does as much right as it does wrong. The opening of the film was ridiculous and over the top, but also fun as hell. The action scenes in general were great in this film, especially near the end. They were fast-paced and hard-hitting, really top-notch. The set design in this film is spectacular, and even though the tone was problematic, it was kind of fun to see the franchise trying to tackle a much darker subject matter. I mean, the Kali Ma scenes were some of the most insane things I've ever seen in a PG movie. This is for all ages? Really? The villain, Mola Ram, is pretty shallow and one-dimensional, but screw it, he looks cool and he's intimidating. He was extremely memorable and he did the job. The best thing I can say about Temple of Doom is that at least it tried something different, so it gets points for originality. In short, Temple of Doom, although flawed, was still fun, effed up, and I still enjoy watching it even today. And always remember, as much as Willie is annoying, she is still very nice to look at. I need to move on to the next film now. Number 15. I gotta say, for the life of me, I don't understand why Hook gets so much hate. Is it a great film? No, but 26% on Rotten Tomatoes? That's incredibly harsh. In my opinion, Hook is Spielberg's most underrated film. While most people see it as a lame example of Spielberg's worst traits, I see it as a unique, interesting, and fun take on the Peter Pan story. I really liked the characters in this movie. Well, most of them. Robin Williams was great as Peter. He was the perfect actor for the role. He starts off very serious and too occupied in his work, but throughout the film he rediscovers his inner kid, and his energetic delivery was pretty great. The Lost Boys were a colorful bunch of characters that for the most part were fairly memorable. But the best character in the film, by far, is Hook himself, played by Dustin Hoffman. He was absolutely hilarious. I laughed every time he was on screen. They even gave him a sentimental side without taking away from his sinister nature. Dustin Hoffman completely stole the show. He was terrific, one of my favorite Spielberg villains of all time. I also liked Peter's kids in the movie, even if his son was a bit annoying at parts. At the very least, their performances were great, which is always worthy of mention. Spielberg always had a gift for directing kids and conveying the emotions felt by kids, and it's felt here as well. You really feel how Peter's son wanted his father to be there for him during moments that mattered to him, and you also feel his disappointment turn to resentment throughout the film. Spielberg did a great job with that aspect. Of course, the technical elements were great as always here. The sets were creative and lively, and the music was also very well done. But of course, the film did have its issues. Though the film is for all ages, the comedy and the tone felt like it was geared much more towards kids than most of his other family films, at least during certain parts. That made the humor fall a bit flat for me. Also, the film was a bit too long, a reoccurring problem with Spielberg. Even though I do like this film, I can't defend its length. 2.5 hours is way too much for this story. It didn't need to be this long. It also has a few really dumb and distracting moments in it, like the weird scene where Tinkerbell grows in size. I have no idea what that was about. And also, is that Phil Collins as the inspector? Why is Phil Collins here? That's random. Anyway, despite the issues, overall, the film is a blast, a fun and wholesome ride. This is the first film on the list where everything fits. The magic, the whimsy, the wonder. In short, the Spielberg feel is abundant here, and I love it. Hook was a nice, sweet movie about the importance of never fully letting go of the kid in each and every one of us. And that's the quintessential message of Spielberg's work. And Hook is the first great example of that on my list. Number 14. I want to talk about Tom Cruise for a second. He's one of the greatest movie stars alive, and he's made a ton of blockbuster hits. 2 of them he made with Steven Spielberg, 2 good ones. The only question is, which one is better? Well, I know I'm probably in the minority on this one, but for me, Minority Report is the lesser of the 2. It's definitely the more thought-provoking, thematically intriguing, and the more interesting of the two, but it's also the more flawed of the two in my opinion, and the flaws were substantial enough to hinder my personal enjoyment. Still, you don't get a top half placement on this list if you're not up to the task, and Minority Report definitely has a lot going for it. It's fast-paced, action-packed, and drenched in world-building and mystery. It's a very engaging watch. I really appreciated the attention to detail in this movie. It really feels like a fully realized futuristic world. Everything feels natural and well integrated. Except for maybe those vertical road things, I can't see how that benefits anything. But what did work really well is how everything in this world scans your eyes to get your identification. It felt very Orwellian, but I did kinda love how commercials were tailor-made for each person because of this. That was a creative touch, and it felt like something that might actually happen in real life. Tom Cruise's character was fleshed out well, his motivations were understandable, and the film makes you care for him. You want to see him clear his name and solve the mystery. The other cast members were great as well, especially Colin Farrell, who was excellent in this movie. And of course, the film is action-packed with impressive cinematography. The chase sequence at the beginning is one of the all-time great Spielberg action sequences, and that overhead shot with the spider searching the apartment complex is also an all-timer. So that was all the good stuff about the film, and as you can see, there's a lot to like here, but I also had my issues with it. For starters, aside from the cinematography, I didn't really like the look of the film. The CGI didn't age well in my opinion, and the general visuals were way too white and lens flary. His other films from the early 2000s also have this problem, but here it's at its absolute worst. Also, the thought of a pre-crime unit is interesting and thought-provoking, sure, but not as much as you might think. I mean, it's obviously wrong. Even if the system worked perfectly, which it doesn't in this film, it would still be wrong. I don't see the dilemma here. To lock up people for crimes they did not yet commit? It's completely morally backwards. But the biggest problem I had with the film is that it has a bunch of plot holes and plot conveniences that are pretty hard to ignore. Like the precog echo, a plot device that has absolutely no natural reason to exist other than to be exploited later for the twist reveal. Also, the scene where he sneaks back into pre-crime, he uses his eye in order to enter, but I thought the whole point of replacing your eyes was to remain undetected, and yet you scan your eye anyway? Why didn't the alarms set off right then and there? And why does he still have clearance to enter anyway after what happened? Things like that take away from the film for me. As a whole, I enjoyed it, and it's better than the majority of Spielberg's other films, but for my money, I actually prefer the other Tom Cruise/Spielberg collaboration, even if most people disagree with me. Number 13. Yep, I'm placing War of the Worlds above Minority Report on my list. Is Minority Report a better film than War of the Worlds? Probably, but I swear to God, I genuinely prefer this one. A film that, unlike West Side Story, actually improves upon the original and manages to justify its own existence in the process. I think War of the Worlds is fantastic for what it is, a relentless roller coaster ride of action, suspense, and devastation. I mean, it's a f***ing thrill ride, and I love it. Pump that adrenaline in my veins, please. I know it might seem surprising, but very few films affected me on a gut, visceral, oh shit, we're fucked level like War of the Worlds did. I love how intense the film is, how you never feel safe, how there's never a dull moment. That first set piece with the tripod was incredible. Oh my goodness. The build-up, the suspense, the visuals, the carnage, the terror, it's awe-inspiring stuff. And it's not the only moment. The film is filled with moments like this. Every single scene with the aliens was heart-stopping, intense, and honestly, scary, genuinely terrifying. This film knows how to crank up the tension, and it doesn't need the tripods to do it. There's a scene where they get attacked by a mob of people, and it was great as well. The film is drenched with desperation. You feel it with all of the characters, even the extras in the background. Really excellent stuff. And honestly, I thought the simple story and characters actually helped the film. I love how our heroes are just the most normal people in the world, with nothing exceptional about them. Tom Cruise is a normal guy in this movie, not very bright, not very skilled, not the best parent, but you root for him anyway. It makes the whole ordeal way more relatable. I only have two flaws with the film. The first is the son character. He was super annoying, his motivations were dumb and didn't make any sense, and the scene where he desperately wants to go to the battlefield was one of the stupidest scenes I've ever seen. The second flaw was the ending. Yeah, it was an anti-climax and it wasn't very good. But honestly, Minority Report's ending wasn't great either, and here, even though it is a flaw, it didn't bother me as much. This movie is a prime example of the "it's about the journey, not the destination" mentality, and this film was a hell of a journey. War of the Worlds is the type of film that knows exactly what it is and doesn't try to be anything different. It shows up, does its job as efficiently as possible, and leaves before it overstays its welcome. I really appreciate films like this, and War of the Worlds certainly earns its very respectable spot on this list because of it. Number 12. Bridge of Spies might seem like a run-of-the-mill, mediocre Spielberg effort at first glance, and it might actually be that to some people, but to me, Bridge of Spies is one of Spielberg's best, most underrated films. It's an effective, intriguing, and sometimes even suspenseful Cold War thriller that explores a bunch of very thought-provoking themes, and it has one of the best protagonists in all of Spielberg's filmography. I'm not kidding. James Donovan might seem like a typical and unremarkable Tom Hanks performance to the untrained eye, but I freaking love the guy. The things this man does in this movie are incredible. He needs to deal with a very significant moral dilemma. On the one hand, he doesn't want to defend the Soviet spy in court because he's an enemy of his country. But on the other hand, he wants to stand up for his country's principles of due process and equal treatment before the law. But of course, if he does decide to do that, he'll be hated and reviled by his own countrymen, which is exactly what happens. The entirety of the first half of the film is fascinating because of it. It was riveting, edge-of-your-seat stuff. These dilemmas are explored through sharp dialogue and fantastic character interactions. Scene after scene, Donovan tries to stand up for what he thinks is right, against a system showing itself more and more to be corrupt, even if it is corruption for the sake of fighting communism, which is a good end. It's really great stuff. I enjoyed every minute of the first half of the film. The second half, though it wasn't as strong as the first in my opinion, was still pretty damn good too. The story shifts from the defense of Abel to the prisoner exchange, as Donovan finds himself needing to negotiate the release of 2 American prisoners. It was just as riveting seeing how he manages to influence the negotiations whilst being behind enemy lines and in dangerous territory, all while trying to deal with the lies and deception thrown at him by the Soviets. It's psychological warfare, and it leads to very tense and nerve-wracking moments, especially near the finale, which was also excellent. The rest of the cast did a great job as well, especially Mark Rylance as the calm and humorous Abel. I loved watching both characters when they were on screen together. As for the technical aspects of the film, that's what brings the film a bit down for me. It's nothing too special, but it doesn't look bad by any means, and if anything, it's a testament to Spielberg's firm hand as a director. He keeps the focus on the story and characters, which is ultimately what matters here, so that's to his credit. I honestly had a blast with this film. I found it to be very enjoyable, very thought-provoking, with great characters, great dialogue, and I had very little issues with it. It's not as iconic as some of his other works, but I think Bridge of Spies is more than a worthy addition to Spielberg's body of work. Number 11. Just barely missing out on the top 10 is Spielberg's latest film, The Fabelmans. And honestly, I wouldn't mind if he'd call it a day after this one, because it was fantastic. It was a real pleasure to see that even after all these years, Spielberg can still make a film that captures the heart and manages to stand shoulder to shoulder with his earlier classics. It's the quintessential representation of movie magic on film, in my opinion. Fitting for Spielberg to be the one to direct it. It's easily his most personal film, and it wears its heart on its sleeve. Just like Bridge of Spies, this film is blessed with a wonderful protagonist. I loved Sammy Fabelman in this movie. His adoration of film was infectious, and I understood and related with him completely. Almost the entirety of the film is from his point of view, and I really enjoyed watching him just go through life. I loved watching him make his movies with his sisters when he was a boy. I loved watching him make his films bigger and better as he gets older. I loved watching his interactions with his parents and all of the emotions there. I even enjoyed all of the high school teen romance stuff. I thought that was great too. It was definitely an enjoyable watch for me. I loved watching him interact with his father most of all, because I felt like both him and his father, played very well by Paul Dano, represent two sides of the same person. The child is starry-eyed, wanting to focus only on his passion, while the father is more pragmatic, down-to-earth, and more reluctant to fully support his son's hobby. That conflict was very relatable for me, and I feel like it is for every single person who ever had a dream but reality got in the way. This film encapsulates those emotions very well. There was only one thing I didn't like about the film, and it was the mother, played by Michelle Williams. I didn't like her the first time I watched the film, and after watching it again, my feelings stayed the same. Her character was very close to being insufferable. Oh, I just feel like dancing for no reason. I'm so eccentric and enchanting. Spare me. She divorces her husband because she fell in love with her husband's best friend. Ouch. She hits her own son on the back, she suffers a bunch of temper tantrums, she can't control her emotions in front of her own children. She was an overgrown child, and it was terrible. Now, that alone isn't a problem. The problem comes when the film tries to make us understand her and even justify her actions. I'm really sorry, but there's nothing to justify here in my opinion. She was a horrible mother and a horrible wife. End of story. Even so, however, I still highly enjoy and love this movie. A film that tells two stories, one of a boy chasing a dream and one of a family breaking apart, and both stories are told exceptionally well. And lastly, I want to leave the film on a positive note. Its ending. The Fabelmans has maybe my favorite ending of any Spielberg movie ever, and it definitely has my favorite final shot of any film ever, regardless if it's directed by Spielberg or not. I know it probably won't be the case, but I wouldn't mind if this was his final film, with that final scene and that final shot, because The Fabelmans isn't a perfect film, but if it were to be the case, it does have the potential to be a perfect send-off to a legendary filmmaking career. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to the top 10. Number 10. After Indy's strange and divisive ventures in Temple of Doom, Spielberg decided to get back to basics when he made the third Indiana Jones movie, The Last Crusade. And I'd say that it paid off. Last Crusade was definitely a return to form. The sense of adventure that was slightly missing from Temple of Doom is back and in full force. The quest to find the Grail was cool and magical, taking our heroes to various locations around the globe, from Venice to Turkey to a literal face-off with Hitler himself in Berlin. I did find the opening of the film to be a bit underwhelming though, if I'm being honest. I mean, it was cute, but a bit convenient. I guess Indy's fear of snakes, his whip, his hat, pretty much all of the characteristics that defined him were established during one single moment from his childhood. It was a significant moment, I guess, but whatever. The rest of the film is a winner, though. Indy is back to his best in this film, noticeably a bit older and a bit slower from his debut appearance. After all, it was an 8-year gap, but he makes up for it with an overabundance of charm and infectious excitement. He really is as giddy as a schoolboy at certain points in this film. The action scenes are excellent here as always, with great stunts and pyrotechnics. The scene with the tank is legitimately one of the greatest action scenes in movie history, and worth the price of admission alone. It's that awesome. The film is also really funny. It's the funniest Indiana Jones movie by far, with most of the comedy coming from the single best thing about the movie, Indiana Jones's father. Sean Connery was simply the perfect casting choice to play Indy's dad, seeing as the character of Indiana Jones was inspired partially by James Bond, the role which Sean Connery made his name with. As Henry Jones Sr., he was fantastic, distinguished, and formidable, but also funny and bumbling at the same time. His relationship with his son is the heart of the film for me. They have such great chemistry together, and they were a joy to watch on screen. They have a lot of funny moments together, but also a fair few emotional scenes as well, and all of it works. I have zero issues with these two characters. It's a slam dunk. The one major flaw that the film does have, unfortunately, is that it's just too similar to Raiders in too many ways. It's almost as if they decided to play it a bit too safe after the adventures or misadventures of Temple of Doom. So they took away most of the negatives from Temple of Doom, but they also took away what made it special, and what you're left with is something that feels kinda like a Raiders 2.0. Good, but maybe too familiar for its own good. Also, the film has the slightest of pacing issues, dragging just a tad at certain points. But other than that, I don't have much to complain about here. The Last Crusade is a great action-adventure film, and one of Spielberg's all-time best. It's fitting that a great film such as this one is kicking off the top 10 in style. Number 9. By far the most unlikely thing about this ranking, for me at least, is that Lincoln made the top 10. It's not something that I anticipated when I started to work on the video, but now, after watching all of the movies again, it dawned on me just how much I love this film. I consider Lincoln to be one of the best and most immersive historical political dramas I've ever seen. It's wonderfully acted, expertly written, and confidently shot with terrific set and costume design. The film brings Civil War-era Washington, D.C. back to life in a very impressive way, from the major buildings and halls all the way to the most minute details. I lost myself in the time period. But let's not beat around the bush. The reason why I love this film so much is thanks to one man. And no, it's not Spielberg for a change. I'm of course talking about Daniel Day-Lewis as Abraham Lincoln. In my opinion, the greatest single performance in any Spielberg film. There are plenty of actors who won acting Oscars for performances in Spielberg movies, but this one was easily the most deserving. He completely disappears into the role. The film delves deep into every aspect of his character, from the public all the way to the most personal and emotional, and he is indeed a fascinating character to watch, with an undeniable screen presence. I could listen to his quirky little stories or his long and profound monologues for hours. Regardless of what you think of the real-life historical figure, there's no denying that he makes this film single-handedly. He is the film's shining star. Of course, Daniel Day-Lewis isn't the only noteworthy member of the cast. The rest of them do a great job too, especially Sally Field and Tommy Lee Jones, who deliver memorable performances. The film is chock full of familiar faces. You got Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Adam Driver, Lee Pace, Michael Stolberg, Walton Goggins. I mean, seriously, this cast is stacked. I really liked this ragtag group of Republicans led by James Spader, who try to get the votes they need to pass the 13th Amendment. They get into some amusing hijinks in this film. Loved their no bullshit attitude. But those were just welcomed light-hearted touches. The rest of the drama surrounding the vote for the abolishment of slavery in America was profound and engaging, and it comes across through the brilliantly written dialogue fitting of the time period. This is probably Spielberg's most politically intriguing film, telling the story of one of the most consequential presidents in American history in masterful fashion. It all culminates in the vote itself, which was a suitably suspenseful and dramatic finale. Special shoutout, however, has to go to the way George Yeaman casts his vote. That was great.
I said Mr. McPherson.
Lincoln is a film that feels important. It feels distinguished, just like the man himself. I had very little issues with it. I found it interesting all the way through, and even though its pacing is slow, I never got bored. It's a film that demands your attention and respect, and I personally was more than happy to give mine. It's a really great film, and in my opinion, one of Spielberg's best. Number 8. Catch Me If You Can is great. I love it so much. It's a highly entertaining, enjoyable, and lively film that does very few things wrong, if any. The entirety of the film is basically one giant chase, but the best thing about it is that you root for both the cat and the mouse. Catch Me If You Can has a magnificent cast, and all of them deliver excellent performances. I love Leonardo DiCaprio in this film as Frank Abagnale Jr. His infectious charisma, his resourcefulness, his determination to escape the law at all costs make for a fascinating and relatable character that I really enjoyed watching. But it's not just fun and games with him. Spielberg manages to humanize him and speak to the more emotional side of the character as well, through his relationship with his parents, especially his father, played wonderfully by Christopher Walken, and his traumatic reaction to his parents' divorce. The scene of the divorce itself was really well done, and it showcases the immense difficulty and pain the child experiences when a family breaks apart. That moment is the driving force behind his actions. You see it in small and clever touches throughout the film, and it really makes you feel for him. Opposite to him, we have Tom Hanks as Carl Hanratty, who delivers his usual great performance, this time with a magnificent accent to boot, and I loved watching him too. But they're both at their best when they share the screen together. I love how the film showcases the contrast between the two characters, how one of them has sex with hot girls and drives fancy cars, while the other messes up his laundry. It's great characterization like this that elevates the film immensely. But of course, it's not just the characters that make this film. The story is awesome here. A bonkers true story that Spielberg translates to the big screen with ease. The chase is fantastic. It's impressive how insane the situations he finds himself in are, and it's always entertaining to see how he gets out of them. The film has so many highlights, it's impossible to name them all. From the scene where Carl finds Frank at a motel and Frank tricks him by pretending to be a Secret Service agent, all the way to the scene where Frank hires a bunch of girls to act as a distraction shield in order to evade the feds. Every single scene has something going for it. There's never a dull moment. We meet a bunch of colorful and memorable characters along the way, played by famous names such as Jennifer Gardner, Martin Sheen, and Amy Adams, all of which were great as well, by the way, that add a welcome dose of variety to the film. It's just a fantastic film from top to bottom. Speaking of, it has one of the greatest opening title sequences ever, giving James Bond a run for his money. It's fitting that we see Frank dress up like him and drive his car then. And of course, the film has a terrific and satisfying ending, leaving you with a smile on your face. It's the complete package, a great film all the way through. Catch Me If You Can is easily one of the best films Steven Spielberg has ever made. Number 7. And with that, we have reached peak Spielberg. This is the Magnificent Seven, the absolute best. Each and every one of the remaining 7 films is a stone-cold classic, and I can understand any case for each of them to be number 1 on this list. So from here on out, if there's a film that you think should be higher, I get it. I think they're all wonderful. But this is my list, and this is my order. And my number 7 pick is Saving Private Ryan, one of the greatest war movies ever made, and with this one, there's no better place to start than with the opening. The opening scene is legendary, and there's really nothing I can say about it that hasn't already been said. It's shocking, extremely hard to watch, with erratic and shaky cinematography, which only increases the sense of chaos and bedlam. The film couldn't have started in a better way. It pulls you right in and never lets you go until it's over. The rest of the film doesn't quite match the quality of the opening scene, which is a minor flaw, but some people tend to forget that the rest of the film is still damn good in its own right. And even without the masterful opening scene, Saving Private Ryan would still be one of the best films Spielberg has ever directed. The story about a group of soldiers trying to locate a certain private with the goal of sending him home after his 3 brothers were already killed in combat is a solid setup which allows us to experience a thrilling, tense, and violent war film of the highest caliber. The characters in the movie were fantastic. This was Tom Hanks' first collaboration with Spielberg, and he delivers a great, commanding, and even heartfelt performance. He's had plenty of great performances under Spielberg, but his first was also his best. His squad is filled with interesting and conflicting personalities, and it's fun to watch them work off of each other. The camaraderie between them was very palpable, so you can imagine that it was very sad to see them die one by one throughout the film. Their deaths are brutal and ugly, just like it is in real life. It was sobering how little honor is found in their deaths, and yet they truly are the greatest heroes. In terms of raw emotional impact, Saving Private Ryan is some of Spielberg's best work. The last character worthy of mentioning is Matt Damon, who plays the titular private. And even though he isn't in the film for very long, his performance was one of the standouts, and he leaves a major impact on the film when he does show up. Saving Private Ryan is a film that doesn't shy away from the brutality of war, while also shining a light on the humanity and bravery that lies at the heart of the heroes who give their lives to protect their nation and their brothers in arms. It might not be an easy watch, but it is expertly crafted, outstanding technically, wonderfully written and acted, supremely directed, wholly immersive, and with a rich, emotional human story at its core. Saving Private Ryan, I salute you. Number 6. Jurassic Park is imagination personified. The concept is pure genius, and the execution is near perfection. I mean, it's dinosaurs. Let's go. The dinosaurs are amazing in this movie. The legendary special effects still hold up today, 30 years later. That's just incredible. The film is great at generating a feeling of awe and wonder. The scene where we see the dinosaurs for the first time, with their shocked expressions, childish glee, and the absolutely iconic musical score, never fails to bring a huge smile on my face. This is why I go to the movies, to see things like that, to feel these types of feelings. It's difficult to find the words. It's magic, pure and simple. Of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. This film gets tense, and I love it. The final half hour especially is a non-stop thrill ride with some legitimately scary sequences that still keep me on the edge of my seat even after watching the movie a bajillion times. This is a film where things truly go off the rails. Characters die left and right, especially when it seems like they'll have a bigger role to play in the story later on. This makes the film legitimately unpredictable, which is difficult to say now after knowing the film like the back of my hand, but think about it and you'll see that I'm right. Even on the philosophical side, Jurassic Park delivers. The film explores conflicting ideas about nature and science. Should we bring dinosaurs back or shouldn't we? I can understand both points of view, which makes it fascinating to contemplate. There's just so much to love about this movie, and I love it a lot, if it wasn't obvious by now. So why is it only number 6 and not higher? Aside from the fact that I love the top 5 more, of course. Well, I found the story and characters to be a bit underwhelming. None of the characters really did anything for me. Except for Ian Malcolm, he's by far the best character in the movie. Jeff Goldblum delivers an iconic performance, way better than the one he gave in The Lost World, of course. I loved him every time he was on screen, so it's a real shame that he has considerably less screen time in the second half, just when the shit starts to go down. The rest of the characters are not bad by any means, I like them all too, but they're not the most interesting in my opinion. Dr. Grant was fine, he was okay. I didn't relate to his emotional development as much as other Spielberg protagonists. Laura Dern was fine, the kids were fine. Hammond was probably the second best character in the film. I felt for him way more than the other characters. Watching his life's work crumble before his eyes and seeing how much he genuinely cares about his grandchildren and worries about their safety, that was great stuff. It's mostly the fact that Grant is a relatively weak protagonist that takes away from the film slightly. Also, there really wasn't much of a story. It's just people go to the park, they almost die, and then they leave. That's basically it. Maybe a meteor story would have helped the film, but in all honesty, it probably doesn't need it. The film is driven by its high core concept of real-life dinosaurs, and it delivers on that concept and then some. Jurassic Park is a sci-fi action extravaganza filled with wonder, thrills, and amazement. It's the stuff that dreams are made of. I love it, and so do you. Number 5. So I know I just finished talking about Jurassic Park, an amazing science fiction film fueled by incredible special effects that still hold up today, which puts an emphasis on wonderment and has a big heart at its core. But do you know what's even more amazing? The fact that Spielberg has already directed such a film, 16 years prior to Jurassic Park, only it's even better. That's right, Close Encounters of the Third Kind is a spectacular feast of a film, a magical, awe-inspiring experience, which is Spielberg's specialty, of course. It's really terrific, and it does a ton of things right with very little missteps. Essentially, it's an alien invasion movie, but it's so much more than that. The story is told from the perspective of a family, where the father becomes obsessed with finding out the truth about the aliens after an encounter with one of the spaceships. That obsession leads his relationship with his wife and kids to deteriorate, and the drama that spawns from that process is really effective. Richard Dreyfuss and Terry Garr kill it in this movie. They're great individually, and their marriage struggles were tragic to behold. Spielberg has always been a master at depicting complicated family dynamics while mixing them with a larger genre story, and this film is one of the greatest examples of this. Here, of course, the genre story is the alien invasion, which is one of the most intriguing alien invasion stories in film history. Unlike most alien invasion movies, here we're not entirely sure what the aliens' intentions are, and the film does a great job at keeping you guessing. The close encounters themselves are sometimes wondrous and sometimes tense. Some moments the aliens seem friendly, while at others they're actually kinda creepy. That mystery is another driving force of the film. You want to know what the truth is. The film also has a wider background story of scientists and journalists trying to get to the bottom of things, through which we get to see how the wider world is reacting to this phenomenon. So the film mixes between the global and the personal. On one hand, it's a global, whimsical, and fantastical alien story, and on the other, it's the personal suburban tragedy about a family breaking apart. The film connects the two seamlessly, and it all comes to a head during the ending, which was an all-timer, one of my personal favorite Spielberg endings. It was a delightful show of sounds and lights. I actually lost myself while watching. It has a hypnotizing quality to it. In short, it's pure movie magic. Close Encounters of the Third Kind is a wonderful film. It's great at building suspense and intrigue, the special effects still hold up today, the music was incredible and iconic, the characters are fleshed out and super relatable, the storytelling is immaculate with great visual symbolism and foreshadowing, the attention to detail is great. I just love and enjoy watching it every single time. It never gets old to me. A terrific film, I love it to death, it's one of Spielberg's all-time greatest. Number 4. Oh man, this movie. What else can I say about it? I've already made a video on it in my Best Picture series, so check it out if you want some extended thoughts. For this video, I'll just sum up real quick. Schindler's List is Spielberg's visual masterpiece. It's his most well-made film on a technical level, and it's not even close. The film is absolutely gorgeous. The cinematography is some of the best in any movie. The music is iconic, the presentation is top class, the film is about 3 hours long but it flies by, you don't even feel it, and the attention to detail is so remarkable that even to this day I notice details that I've missed in previous viewings. Like how in the scene where Schindler sends a letter to several men announcing the opening of his company, we see that his voiceover narration is in sync with the people reading the letter aloud. This film never ceases to amaze me. It's also one of the most brutally realistic and violent films I've ever seen in my life. The atrocities on display committed by the Nazis against the Jews during the Holocaust are just as powerful, just as sickening, just as stomach-churning as they were 30 years ago when this film was made. Spielberg has definitely succeeded in making a timeless work of art that will be appreciated and beloved for generations to come. So why doesn't Schindler's List just top the list altogether? Why is it only number 4? Well, Schindler's List, no matter how great it is, was never gonna make the podium. It just wasn't gonna do it. It's impossible to deny Schindler's List filmmaking prowess, but when it comes to the heart, when it comes to my personal connection and attachment, and my personal taste, Spielberg has 3 films that managed to capture me even more. These final 3 incredible films were always going to top my list. I knew it from the very beginning. They are a cut above the rest. My 3 favorite Spielberg films, and 3 of my most favorite films in general. Now, if you've been paying attention, you can probably guess the 3 films that I'm talking about. But can you guess the order? Time to find out. Number 3. I've been noticing a trend on the internet recently of people saying that The Last Crusade is their favorite Indiana Jones film, and that would be true for me as well. If Raiders of the Lost Ark didn't exist, I see why people love The Last Crusade, I love it too. But come on, it's gotta be Raiders. It's the superior film in almost every single way, and I'm willing to fight you on that. Raiders is my all-time number 1 favorite action-adventure movie. It's so good in so many ways that it's hard for me to know where to begin, so I guess I'll just start from the top. The film has one of the greatest and most iconic opening sequences in film history. Everything from the introduction of Indy to the scenes with the booby traps, the golden idol, the rolling boulder, and even the introduction of the main villain. It's simply a perfect start, literally perfect. I know people keep talking about the opening to Saving Private Ryan, and with good reason, but for me, this is the best opening to any Spielberg movie ever. Beyond that, I also love how the film doesn't waste any time. Straight after the opening, the film sets up the adventure Indy will be going on, and off we go. Indiana Jones is a great, iconic, and timeless character, and Harrison Ford is at his best in this movie. He was never better as this character than he was right here. His look is instantly recognizable. The hat, the whip, his charm, his masculinity, but also the fact that he makes the occasional mistake and has to work his way up from the bottom. It's a recipe for an all-time great protagonist. His cultural mark will remain forever. Other than Indy, Raiders showcases the best collection of characters in any Indiana Jones film ever. I know The Last Crusade had Sean Connery, which was great, but Raiders has the best version of Indy, the best love interest in the series, and the best villain in the series. You can't top that, you just can't. Marion was great in this movie. She was fiery and confident, but also way over her head, and her chemistry with Indy was wonderful. And then we get to Belloc, and his introduction during the aforementioned opening perfectly showcases the ways he's different from our hero. The relationship between the two gets established early on, and every time they were on screen together, I was hooked. It's one of the greatest hero-villain dynamics of all time. All the rest of the side characters were great and memorable in their own way as well, from Brody to Sala, and especially that crazy Nazi guy with the glasses. That guy was awesome, even if he barely did anything in the movie. So I talked about the opening and the characters. What's next? Well, no action film is complete without action, and holy shit, the action in this movie is fantastic. The action scenes have structure, they're dynamic and varied. You get chase scenes, you get fist fights, you get gunfights, and there's even one scene when you get an unexpected joke. But the strength of the film is that it doesn't really have any action scenes, it's more like action gauntlets. My favorite of which is the one that starts with a fist fight next to an airplane, which leads to a chase scene with Indy chasing a truck on horseback, and that leads to Indy commandeering the truck and fighting off the Nazis that are on it. And that leads to Indy finding himself getting dragged on the dusty road, hanging onto his whip for dear life as he tries to work himself back up all the way again to the steering wheel. What I just described to you right there is my favorite action set piece of all time. So yeah, I love the action here. It's some of the best I've ever seen. I just absolutely adore this film, and there's still so much that I haven't touched on, from the Ark of the Covenant itself, how its mystical aspect adds a layer of fantasy, and how the film foreshadows its destructive capabilities and pays them off fantastically. All the way to the music. Holy crap, how can I not talk about the music? It's so good! God, I love this movie. It's iconic on the level of Star Wars. It's an integral part of pop culture. It's an absolutely fantastic film. And yet, it has to settle only for the bronze medal. Oh my goodness. Let's continue. Number 2. Words cannot begin to describe the struggle I had in choosing between these last two films. They keep interchanging depending on my feelings and on any given period. But the time has come. I have to make a definitive choice. So here it is. My number 2 Spielberg film of all time is Jaws. It is yet another masterpiece by this legendary director, and it was only his third feature-length film. Spielberg was younger than I am right now when he directed this, and because I'm getting depressed just thinking about it, I will swiftly move on. I can't possibly go over every single thing that I like about this movie. I literally can't. Just the notes that I wrote while watching the film are about 3 pages long. It'll take a 2-hour video essay in order to even begin scratching the surface of what makes this film so special. How could I convey just how much I love this movie to you? I genuinely think it's impossible. I mean, where do I even begin? The opening scene? It's iconic, extremely effective, and sets the tone perfectly for the rest of the film. It still gives me shivers even today. From that moment on, every single time we're in the water, it gets tense, which makes the second half, when they're always in the water, just constantly suspenseful. We just sit there and wait for that music to start. The musical score by John Williams is one of his greatest ever compositions, and recognizable as all hell. I love the fact that you barely see the shark, and that Spielberg took advantage of technical issues on set in order to make the film 1,000 times better than it could have been. I love all of the characters in this movie, even the asshole ones. I love the 3 main characters most. Quint is a badass. His entrance is amazing, his exit is equally amazing, his monologue is the most chilling part of the film, and Robert Shaw delivers a legendary performance. Hooper was great too. Richard Dreyfuss was excellent. His interactions with Quint were always entertaining as hell. But my favorite of the bunch was Marcus Brody, mostly because he's the most fleshed out. I related to Brody a lot, from his fear of water to the genuine regret and sorrow that he feels after the death of a boy on his watch, all the way to his sense of duty to kill the shark. All of his scenes with his wife and kids are wonderful. I love the family dynamic. You get a sense of who these people are just by watching them interact with one another. The film has a bunch of wholesome and emotional family moments here that really touched me. I love the world building in this movie. The scene direction is incredible, especially in the first half when they're on the island. Spielberg uses a ton of wonders in this movie that are so smart and creative visually. The film is filled with energy and life. There's always something going on. There's a breath to the film. People talk over one another. Scenes feel like they've already started before the camera cuts to them, which makes everything feel more believable and realistic. I love the fact that this film cares about the little details, like how in the scene where Hooper and Quint show their scars to one another, we see Brody glimpsing at a scar of his own, yet he chooses to remain silent. It's moments like this that astound me. The attention to detail Spielberg is famous for was present from the very beginning. The film doesn't feel manipulative or artificial. Everything just makes perfect sense. The plot progression is fantastic. Everything fits. The fact that Brody wants to close the beaches, the fact that the dead boy's mother puts a bounty on the shark, which leads to the island getting filled with shark hunters from all over the states, the fact that they catch a random shark and they open up its belly to make sure it's the shark they're looking for. The script is just airtight. Nothing feels out of place. It's a, dare I say it, masterwork. I even love this guy. What the f is up with this guy? I love this dude that I don't understand a single word that comes out of his mouth. I wonder what happened to that guy. Holy shit! I even love the guy that says, "A what?
A what?"
Am I conveying my adoration for this film well enough? I mean, let's ask the opposite question. Is there anything that I don't like about this movie? I really need to think about this, so bear with me. That scene with the two fishermen was pretty meh, I guess. The ending was a bit rushed, but it was still frickin' awesome, so I guess that doesn't count. Yeah, I got nothing. Jaws is basically a perfect film. It should have won Best Picture in 1975 in my opinion, and that year was stacked. Spielberg definitely should have been at least nominated for Best Director. Even Spielberg himself was shocked that he wasn't.
I wasn't nominated!
Jaws is one of the greatest films of all time. Steven Spielberg took a B-movie plot and added quality, depth, and intrigue, all through his direction, and he single-handedly created the summer blockbuster in the process. Just wow. That's why Jaws is great, and that's why I love it so much. But you know what's the most shocking thing? That even after all that, there's one that I like even more. And all of you wonderful people probably already know what it is. So enough wasting time, let's reach the top of the mountain. Number 1. E.T. doesn't have the thrills of Jaws, the technical mastery of Schindler's List, the action of Raiders, the majesty of Close Encounters, or the special effects of Jurassic Park. So why, oh why, is E.T. better than all the films I just mentioned? Well, because in my opinion, it's the film where Spielberg was at his best simply being Spielberg. After watching his entire filmography multiple times, it's apparent to me that what makes Spielberg such a special filmmaker is that he's able to tap into this childlike sense of magic and wonder better than any other director. Sometimes he makes a serious, mature film, but for the most part, that's what he does. We've seen him do it time and time again throughout his very best films. But let's look at the top 10 for a second. All of these fun, exciting, and whimsical films are from the point of view of adults. There are some kid characters in them, but they're never the main focus. And I'm not shocked that this is the case. It is supremely difficult to make a good movie where children are the main characters, let alone a great movie. Let alone one of the greatest family pictures ever made. But that is exactly what Steven Spielberg has achieved with E.T. the Extraterrestrial. I know it's a cliched sentiment by this point, but this movie truly does make me feel like a kid again. There's just something about it, something that touches me on such a deep level, more than any other Spielberg film, and more than most other films in general. It's as if Spielberg literally stepped inside the mind of a child, looked at how his imagination works, and made a movie out of it. I can't find any other way to explain it. E.T. is my favorite Spielberg film because every time I watch it, it takes me on a roller coaster of emotions. I feel the emotions in my bones. I feel joy, I feel wonder, I feel amazement, I feel hurt, I feel sad, I feel hope, and all of that in the span of less than 2 hours. Not to mention that all of these emotions are generated from an ugly puppet that looks like a big turd. Forget the shark robot from Jaws. This is Spielberg's miracle right here. The fact that he managed to take this puppet and make one of the most emotionally resonant films ever revolve around it. He just wants to go home. He just wants to go home. I swear to God, this film has direct access to my tear ducts. Spoilers for E.T., I guess. Do I even need to issue a spoiler warning for this? Whatever. The third act, the scene where E.T. is dying, and how Elliot cries and wants to be with him, and then E.T. comes back, and they fly on their bikes to the sound of the iconic score, and they reach E.T.'s spaceship, and they say their goodbyes, and E.T. leaves forever. I'm not ashamed to say this at all. I cry every single time. And I don't mean that I get teary-eyed or anything pedestrian like that. I mean full-on tears and snot dripping from my face. I just sob like a little girl. And I'm proud of it. I know it might seem silly, but no film gets me crying like this more than E.T. And the reason these scenes work is thanks to the heartwarming and powerful connection between Elliot and E.T. that the film develops. Elliot is a great protagonist. He channels that innocence and imagination that can only be associated with a child. Henry Thomas delivers one of the best child performances in history. He was believable and authentic. All the performances were great. By that point, Spielberg had already explored the inner workings of family dynamics in Jaws and in Close Encounters, and in E.T. he does it again, only better. You feel for every single one of them, especially Elliot, a slightly eccentric boy simply trying to find his place after his parents' divorce. And he finds exactly that with E.T., an alien left stranded on Earth trying to get back home. Through this relationship and the other relationships Elliot has with his mother, his brother, and his sister, we get a truly special film. The fact that it's from the perspective of children is key because I believe that this unlocks something universal for all ages that simply can't be accessed through adults. You get hints of it in his other works, but here it's laid bare. Pure movie magic. And of course, the film is also great on a technical level. I especially love the atmospheric lighting and the remarkable musical score. These and so much more enhance the experience even further and push E.T. into the realm of all-time classics, masterpiece levels. I can wax lyrical on this film for hours, believe me, but I think I've made my point clear enough. E.T. is wholeheartedly, unabashedly, unequivocally one of my favorite films of all time. And of course, in my opinion, it's the best film Steven Spielberg has ever made. Oh my goodness, I actually did it. Thank you so much for watching this video, you guys. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. Now it's your turn. How do you rank Steven Spielberg's filmography? Let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know which ranking video you'd like to see me do next. I'm always interested in hearing your suggestions. Again, thank you all so much, and have a good one.